Morant with a running start. Elevate! Oh, it dunks! Oh, my goodness!
Tie game in overtime. Gasol will turn. His heat is gone! Memphis on top. 7-10 remaining.
Conley now with three. Count it! A 15-point lead for Memphis. And Blake Griffin gets into it on the floor with Randolph. Hard to tell if there are any punches being thrown under there, but Griffin took acceptance.
Adams going long. Morant! He hit it! John Morant! Insanity!
You gotta be kidding me.
Welcome to Grits and Grinds, a Memphis Grizzlies podcast. My name is Keith Parrish. The Grizzlies lost their third straight home game, their third straight game, giving up a last-second game winner. This time it was an actual walk-off buzzer beater. One of the more catastrophic endings to a game you could draw up. Having the final possession in a tie game, and instead of getting the last shot, it ends up being a turnover and a fast break for the other team. And now the Grizzlies have lost 3 straight games for the first time all season. And more importantly, the bigger story than the Grizzlies losing at the buzzer again is that Jaren Jackson Jr. injured his ankle. He left the game 2 minutes in, did not return. There is still no update on his status. So on today's episode, we got to talk about the game and what the injury to Jaren and also the continued injuries of Ja Morant, what that means for the Grizzlies. Before we get into it, just a reminder, if you want to support this show, if you want to get access to the exclusive listener Slack, if you want to listen to the bonus episode I dropped on Sunday answering listener questions, all of that is at patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. A huge thank you to everyone who has signed up and joined over there. So the injury to Jaren, I guess let's start there. It is, of course, the worst probably possible thing that could happen to the Grizzlies, specifically for Jaren. Beyond him missing games, there are the bigger storylines as far as him trying to make first team All-NBA or just an All-NBA team. He's probably not going to make the first team, but he seemed destined to finish at the very worst on third team All-NBA. And of course, that would make him Supermax eligible. That would make it where the Grizzlies could sign him to an extension and he would not hit unrestricted free agency. Of course, he's right now competing for Defensive Player of the Year. He was initially the favorite after Victor Wembanyama went down with injury. He's no longer the favorite, but this injury imperils that situation too because he's only played 59 games so far. He still has to play 6 more games this year. Now, the Grizzlies have 21 games left on their schedule. Actually, this last game doesn't even count. You have to log 20 minutes for it to count. There's some leeway where my understanding is you can only play 15 minutes in 2 of the games and have it still count for the 65-game rule. Jaren only played 2 minutes in this game. It does not count. He needs to play 7 of the Grizzlies' remaining 21 games. We do not know the severity of the ankle sprain. I mean, you think about the Grizzlies players just this year, and the difference in some of these ankle sprains has been vast, like a Cam Spencer or Vince Williams Jr. That could mean missing most of the rest of the season. Now, hopefully he can return within a week or 2 weeks. That's common for a lot of players. So I don't know what it's going to be. They did not even officially announce him out for the game on Monday night, which would have helped fantasy basketball players. Not that that really matters, but I need to put Jaren on my IR spot in my fantasy leagues. But Jaren being out, of course, harms the Grizzlies in their race to stay in the top 4 in the West. I mean, they're 3-7 in their last 10. Of course, that's 3-7 since the trade deadline. They now trail the Lakers by 2 games in the loss column. They are only 1 game up on the Rockets. And of course, the Rockets have the tiebreaker. So the Grizzlies right now with no Jaren possibly, maybe for the Thunder game on Wednesday, maybe if he's out for a week or two or more, they are fighting for their lives to maintain home court advantage in the first round of the playoffs. And of course, the priority is the playoffs for the Grizzlies, for the team. But there is a balance of the real world situation of Jaren wanting to make that supermax, wanting to be eligible for that money. And there's the real world issue of Jaren, investing a season and being able to make an all defensive team or being able to make all NBA. These are big issues. These are big problems with the NBA's 65 game rule. Another guy, Kyrie Irving, got hurt on Monday night. Same situations. Kyrie, going to be considered for an all NBA team. And now the 65 game rule puts that up in the air, puts that in jeopardy. But Jaren leaves the game. That's the biggest story. Not Karis LeVert getting the walk-off. Not the Grizzlies completely imploding in the final 6 minutes, being unable to score whatsoever. Not Desmond Bane, who had the first triple-double of his career, 35 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists, but had a miserable fourth quarter as he could not carry the burden of being the go-to guy in clutch time. Now, the biggest issue is Jaren being hurt. And also, it's that Ja Morant is still hurt, and Ja Morant is still not available. Remember, he was not on the initial injury report for the Saturday game against the Spurs. He was not on the initial injury report. Then it came out, his shoulder's giving him trouble. He's questionable for the game. He missed Saturday night's game. We were like, why did you go through all that drama? We assumed he wouldn't play the second night of a back-to-back. What's the big deal? Well, here we are 2 days later. Ja Morant missed the game with the sore shoulder. If Ja Morant can't stay healthy, that, of course, is a huge issue. And then you have, your guys lower down on the depth chart, like Vince Williams Jr., who did play in this game, set a season high in minutes, but Vince has been struggling with his sprained ankle all year. Before the game, he told DeMichael Cole he's about 80%. That's not great. The fact that Vince still is not 100%, we've got a little bit more than a month left in the regular season. And I don't mean to keep harping on the trade deadline and going back to that, because with a lot of these trades, we always assume that the team has more information than we do. They are privy to things that we don't know. Maybe that assumption is wrong sometimes, but I have to figure they had a better grasp of Ja Morant's health than I did, or than all of us did. And the fact that it keeps being the shoulder, that is the problem. That all season we've had concerns about the way he's looked on the court, whether or not he was fully healthy. So for them at the trade deadline, you'd think they have a good grasp on Ja Morant's health level and whether or not he can make it through an entire playoff run. And then you think about the information they had on Vince Williams Jr.'s health. I mean, the trade deadline was a month ago about. If Vince is 80% right now, he was less than that a month ago. And if they knew Vince was not totally healthy, they knew Ja Morant was going to keep struggling with injuries. And by the way, if they had very little faith in G.G. Jackson, why in the world did they get rid of two useful role players in Marcus Smart and Jake LaRavia? Marcus Smart, who could do emergency ball handling, emergency point guard things in games where Desmond Bane, where Ja Morant is not available. Like Scottie Pippen Jr. played a few minutes in the fourth quarter because they just needed a ball handler. I mean, in retrospect, it's easy to say maybe Scottie Pippen Jr. should have been out there on the court at the end of the game against the Hawks as the Grizzlies only scored 2 points in the final 4 minutes. They got outscored 19-6 over the final 7 minutes of the game. And I know, of course, Marcus Smart is not the paragon of health. But to willingly make your depth worse, when we defended the move, or anyone who defended the move at the trade deadline, saying, well, they did that because they trust G.G. Jackson, they trust Vince Williams Jr., they're better without Marcus Smart. And also, hey, they're healthy. They were healthy for that week of the NBA trade deadline. But if they had this information about Ja's health being precarious, about Vince's health being precarious, and now we're closing these games with multiple rookies on the court. I mean, yes, it's bizarre to lose 3 straight games with a go-ahead shot for the other team in the final 5 seconds. Our buddy Sean Coleman did the research, did the legwork, says it's been the first time in 20-something years that's happened in the NBA. But in some of these games, 2 of the games, you had 2 rookies on the court. Not that it's their fault, but these are not the ideal lineups. Of course, Ja Morant missed 2 out of these 3 games. Brandon Clark wasn't available at the end of 2 of these 3 games. Jaren Jackson Jr., of course, injured, did not finish this last game. So there's context to the losing, but the overall big picture thing is the Grizzlies have injury concerns, and I feel like they knew they would have had injury concerns, and that just goes to the whole depth thing. Depth doesn't matter until it does. If you stay healthy, you're like, see, we didn't need depth. But now they're not healthy, and it looks like the next little bit for the Grizzlies is going to be quite the challenge. Now let's talk about this game some. I sort of jumped to the end, and the end I think is the most important part. Although, for, I'd say, the second straight game, this game was lost in the first half. Specifically, this game was lost in the second quarter. In the second quarter, the Grizzlies got booed. The home fans were booing. They were booing the perceived lack of effort. To my eyes, it did not seem like the Grizzlies were trying very hard. They gave up multiple run-out layups. They were not finding a guy in transition. They were not guarding the paint. They gave up 50 points in the paint in just the first half. The Hawks dropped 70 points on them in the first half. This Hawks team also is not very good. They had 86 points in the paint for the game. I mean, the Grizzlies were only down 5 after giving up a miserable 16-2 run in the second quarter. They were still only down 5 at halftime, but they should have been up more. And I think you saw in that half, maybe, again, they were psychologically damaged by losing Jaren Jackson Jr., but it also was basically a carbon copy of the game against the Spurs, where the Spurs had a 77-point first half. They're not playing defense. They're now 28th in defensive rating since the trade deadline. You're not playing defense. And oh, by the way, more important than Jaren playing 7 more games to win Defensive Player of the Year, the Grizzlies actually have to play defense. If the Grizzlies keep trending this way, Jaren wouldn't have a chance at winning Defensive Player of the Year even if he was healthy and available and played all the required games. But the Grizzlies' defense was not good enough. You also saw like G.G. Jackson. G.G. Jackson got the opportunity in this game. When Jaren got hurt, G.G. was the sub that came in. G.G. started the second half in Jaren's place. G.G. looked completely lost at times on defense. And I'm not smart enough to know everybody's defensive assignment for the Grizzlies, but it frequently seemed like some guy would be wide open, and then you look at G.G. and he's kind of pointing or looking at everybody else like, hey, what are we supposed to do here? Maybe I'm just reading that situation wrong. But you kind of see the reasons why maybe G.G. hasn't been trusted with that many minutes. And then like Vince Williams Jr., his numbers have plummeted. The Grizzlies defense this year, and I've always said, I always like to spell out individual defensive rating. It's a very murky stat. I like to use it when it supports my argument, but like right now, the Grizzlies defense is way worse when Vince Williams Jr. is on the court. I would hope as a ardent supporter of Vince Williams Jr. that's a function of him going out there with the second unit a lot of the time. The second unit has not been able to defend in the past few weeks. But even with all the defensive problems early on, the Grizzlies bounced back. They had an awesome third quarter. After losing the second quarter 42-31, they won the third quarter by the exact same score, 42-31. They built a double-digit lead in the fourth quarter. All of this seems like, okay, good. They bounced back. They played well. Luke Kennard had a tremendous game. Desmond Bane, like we were talking about, was going crazy. Desmond Bane with an awesome game through the first three quarters. Important caveat right there. But then, after starting the fourth quarter in a very positive fashion with Luke Kennard, Jalen Wells, John Conchar, Vince Williams Jr., and Zach Edey, they started slowing the game down. And that is really when things, I think, kind of fell off. I got nervous about this. I noticed the time wasting began. And it's a careful balance you have to strike when you do the time wasting. Like, they didn't throw the ball in immediately after a Hawks made basket. They burned off about 10 seconds. This was with roughly 6 minutes to play, if I remember correctly. And yeah, you want to let the clock run, and that can be an advantage, but slowing the game down does not help the Grizzlies. Despite the fact that their season-long half-court offensive numbers are actually good, I'm still pretty convinced that slowing the game down does not help the Grizzlies. And then you got into these half-court sets where nothing happened. The Grizzlies would use up the whole shot clock and then be forced into a tough attempt at the end of the shot clock, and that's why they stopped scoring. Specifically the final, the final 5 possessions? So their final basket was this Zach Edey dunk. That's the dunk that gave Bane his 10th assist. Seemed to be possibly a scripted play. It was a nice setup and execution of the play for a dunk by Zach Edey. Then all of the possessions after that. The next one was a missed Desmond Bane 3 on a completely dead possession. He had to launch a desperation step back at the end of the shot clock. Now, Jalen Wells gets the rebound, gets an offensive rebound. He then puts it back up, gets fouled, but this foul call is challenged and overturned. That foul call being overturned, that's an entirely different story. I feel like it was representative of a lot of the things that are wrong with NBA rules. Like Trae Young established defensive position or a legal position, but then he starts leaning back. Jalen Wells doesn't run or jump. He's just standing there. I mean, I guess he jumps, but like for me, that was marginal contact. There's no reason Trae Young needs to fall down. But I guess by the rule book, that's defined as an offensive foul. That seems like something that should be looked at. I mean, I know they're not going to. I have huge issues with a lot of the NBA's foul rules, but to me, that should not have been let's be clear. It shouldn't have been a foul based on how I think the fouls should be written. Unfortunately, the way the NBA rules are written, it was a foul. So that call is overturned. It becomes an offensive foul and a turnover on Jalen Wells. The next offensive possession for the Grizzlies. Desmond Bane travels, and he has done this many times in clutch situations this year. You see the limitation of Desmond Bane as an ISO scorer and creator in these clutch situations when the defense ratchets up. So he turns the basketball over on a very blatant travel. Then the next possession, this is after the Cavaliers. Then the next possession, this is after the Hawks have already tied the game. Vince Williams Jr. takes a desperation sort of running 15-footer at the end of the shot clock. Again, a totally dead possession. Someone gets the ball with 5 seconds left on the shot clock. They have to create all by themselves. I don't know if the last 2-minute report is going to say there was a foul on this play. Looked like there could have been a foul. Vince tries to initiate contact, does not get the call, throws up a wild 15-footer or so. Then the Grizzlies get a stop. Karis LeVert misses a wide open 3-pointer. So the final possession, as you know, Desmond Bane gets his pocket picked by Dyson Daniels. Now, the play the Grizzlies ran here, so they didn't call timeout because maybe they wanted to not let the Hawks set their defense. They wanted to make sure the Hawks possibly couldn't sub off Trae Young. But the play the Grizzlies ran, they had Desmond Bane going essentially one-on-one against Dyson Daniels. That's advantage Dyson Daniels. They did. I mean, maybe it wasn't totally one-on-one. You had Jalen Wells and Zach Edey up there, possibly to run some form of screening action. Unfortunately, Jalen Wells did not get Dyson Daniels off of Desmond Bane at all. all that seemed to happen was it just clogged things up. Also, you had the best 3 Hawks defenders involved in the play. Trae Young is hidden in the corner. Trae Young should have been the one having to defend any kind of action the Grizzlies ran. But no, Trae Young is hidden on the corner guarding Vince Williams Jr. Meanwhile, the Grizzlies use their 2 rookies as the screeners, and that brings in all of the Hawks' 3 best defenders together. You have Karis LeVert, Onyeka Okongwu, and Dyson Daniels guarding this play. None of that, to me, seems ideal. But, as always, there's a good chance I don't know what I'm talking about. So, the Grizzlies lose the game. They can't score in the stretch, and that is how we end up with 3 straight excruciating, heartbreaking losses. Now, let's take a quick break, and then I'm going to wrap up the show with some stats for all the players involved. All right, some not great stats from this one. The Grizzlies had 20 turnovers. The Hawks had 29 points off of those turnovers. The bad fourth quarter for Desmond Bane really spoils what was otherwise an excellent game, of course. He scored 35 points, 10 assists, 10 rebounds, was 14 for 14 from the foul line. That ties, of course, Ja Morant for the second most makes in a game without a miss from the foul line in franchise history. It was a career high in made free throws for Desmond. Meanwhile, Luke Kennard got the start. He did not bizarrely come off the bench like he did in the Spurs game. Luke Kennard had 17 points and 7 assists and 2 steals. By the way, with those 7 assists, Luke Kennard passed Nick Calathis and Steven Adams to now have the 35th most assists in franchise history. Zach Edey, he started again. Oh, also, I haven't even said it yet. A huge issue with this game, no Santi Aldama. They desperately needed Santi Aldama, but Santi too hurt to play, / it felt like a rest game for Santi Aldama. But Santi Aldama, they needed his creation. They needed his offensive creativity, just the variation of having another unique player out there. You felt it. You absolutely needed that. But Edey, he started 15 points, 5 rebounds, 1 block, 2 assists. Jalen Wells had 12 points, 6 assists, and 2 steals. Again, Jalen Wells's Rookie of the Year campaign and Zach Edey's Rookie of the Year campaigns, they're getting harmed by the losing, also harmed by the other rookies doing things against them, like Zachary Richichet had a huge game, made 11 out of 13 field goal attempts. Meanwhile, Karis LeVert made 9 out of 11 field goal attempts in just the second half. He scored 16 points in the fourth quarter. Also, by the way, Karis LeVert, probably someone you could have traded for at the trade deadline, as I believe he was a throw-in. He was matching salary in the DeAndre Hunter trade. Brandon Clark returned, had 11 points and 7 rebounds. Vince Williams Jr., again, season high in minutes with 25 minutes played, had 15 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists. He did have 4 turnovers, which of course is too much for what Vince does out there. G.G. Jackson played 28 minutes, scored 11 points. It took him 11 shots to do so, 3 for 11 from the field. That's 1 out of 5 on 2-pointers, 2 out of 6 on 3-pointers. He did have 7 rebounds. Also, he had a bunch of turnovers. 5 turnovers for Gigi. 9 combined turnovers for Gigi and Vince is just not good enough at all. Scottie Pippen Jr. played 16 minutes, had 9 points, 4 assists. John Conchar played 15 minutes. And I say this without any hint of irony or joking. I feel like this game needed more John Conchar. But of course, people were real mad when John Conchar played last game. John Conchar had 5 points. He made his only 3-point attempt. He had 1 steal, 1 rebound. Lamar Stevens played 3 minutes in the first half. He did not play in the second half. And now the Grizzlies play, they wrap up their homestand on Wednesday night against the Thunder. Now, usually when things are the darkest, I feel like you get like a weird upset win. This feels like, oh, this is being set up to be an upset win over the Thunder. That's all this 3-game losing streak at home in horrific fashion with a Jaren Jackson Jr. injury. That's all it means. We're going to stun the Thunder. I hope. If not, it's going to look even more bleak out there. And of course, there's frustrations, I think, among the fan base with Taylor Jenkins and the coaching staff and the decisions they've made. I have never been a massive Taylor Jenkins fan, but also I'm pretty timid in my criticisms. I usually think that this team right now, I've had more issues with just the roster construction, and that's been the way it's been all season. This sort of just feels like a regression to the mean with these 3 close losses. I feel like maybe they were winning more games than you'd expect earlier in the year. So, like, I don't know what Taylor Jenkins really could have done that differently in a lot of these games, other than if you want to assign the blame for the defensive effort on the coach, which is usually what happens in sports. Oh, sure, absolutely. The effort is not there anymore. If that is the coach's fault, yes, okay then. That makes sense. But, like, I don't think the Grizzlies are going to do anything until the end of the offseason. And even then, I wouldn't expect them to fire Taylor Jenkins. I don't feel like that's the thing they think about. I mean, if they lose in the first round, it seems like a change would be warranted. You don't normally have coaches have this long of a tenure in the NBA. So, I don't know. I don't know if the hot seat is the right word, but it's got to be tingling a little bit with the Grizzlies now 3-7 in their last 10 and possibly going to 3-8 since the trade deadline if they lose to the Thunder on Wednesday night. So I guess we can say Taylor Jenkins is a little bit on the hot seat. Whether or not he deserves the blame for them having to play John Conchar and Scottie Pippen Jr., like guys who we like, okay, but I don't know. If Ja Morant's not going to play in a basketball game, if Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. are not going to be available in a game, and also Santi Aldama's not going to be in a game, losing at the buzzer is not an unreasonable outcome. I know it's not fun to think about it like that. Like the Spurs game. If Ja Morant and Desmond Bane are going to miss a basketball game, losing at the buzzer is not an unreasonable outcome. So I think, to me, it's more like my Taylor Jenkins questions have always been, is this the guy who can get us out of the first round of the playoffs? But regular season, the Grizzlies get success because of this formula of trusting their players and trusting their depth. Right now, my issues are more like, why are these the players that we have available? Also, I think, going back to the top of the show, did we not know more about Ja's health and Vince's health and the team's trust in Gigi before we made these roster moves that seem to be focused on future luxury tax concerns and or not wanting to risk Jaren hitting free agency? And maybe it would have been a better idea to strike now while the team's good and try to actually win some basketball games this season. Anyways, here I go beating a dead horse. That's all for today. If you want to support the show, patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. Hope you guys have a great Tuesday. I'll talk to you soon. Go Grizz.